Everybody, welcome back to school wherever that may be, whether it's in person, hybrid, or remote learning. So this piece is called Back to School and Special Education, Rebuilding Learning Stamina for Our SPED Kids. The welcoming, the purpose of the webinar is that we know that all students, but particularly many students with special needs, thrive on routine. And this webinar will focus on transition techniques to rebuild learning stamina for students with special needs returning to higher rigor for fall 2020. As I just wanted to introduce myself, is that I am a game designer turned school principal, and have enjoyed both careers immensely. In my game design background, I've created games that have sold over 20 million units. I've worked on entertainment properties, including Star Wars, Disney movies, Batman, Spider-Man, Major League Baseball, and I have been privileged to do educational games with the Field Museum, the American Museum of Natural History, the Smithsonian, among others. And the thought here is that to move from higher levels of engagement from games to move from there, meaning games, to here, specifically the school environment, and specifically in the school environment to within special education. So we'll talk about lesson planning, gamification, movement, increasing additional rigor for e-learning, and all of this is really going to be predicated based upon using gamification to discuss all those. The webinar applies for returning, for who have in your school special education students who are returning to the classroom for in full-time, in-person learning, in a hybrid model, or whether it's beginning of the year in all remote learning. And we wanted to talk about this, the idea that in order to build student stamina, we really need to talk about building stamina among teachers and therapists and our paraprofessionals as well. So I'm inviting you to do is to examine where your staff is how is your staff stamina? If their stamina is low, how can we most effectively raise their stamina for their returning students? And how are you going to build up your staff? So this is the first question box, and I really wanted to make this presentation as interactive as possible. So you're going to see like a dozen different questions for us to participate in together. And Arlen is going to be the executive producer and my partner in all this, and so he'll be able to read back the kinds of responses that we're getting. So in the first question, turn to the question box, please, is please answer the question: what are other steps you can take at your school to combat the blahs for both kids and for staff returning, and also the kinds of things if the staff are fearing a return to in-person learning, if you're moving to hybrid, or even if there's fears having to do with the continuation remote learning. So what are the kinds of things that you can do, ideas that you have when it comes to building stamina, specifically to begin with your staff? To the question.
Yes, Phil. So we've already got one coming in from Karen. She says rapport building activities.
Excellent, Karen. Thank you.
Kara says have an open, honest conversation where they can air their concerns and ask questions.
Excellent.
Alyssa says make it the most positive experience. Maybe make a workout distance class in the morning.
Excellent.
Kina says encourage self-care.
Beautiful.
From Dawn, have an open discussion where everyone's opinion is valued and encourage a short walk during break times.
Excellent. How about one more? Why don't we look to take, as we begin here, and we'll see how our timing works with responses, is that why don't we look ideally like a half a dozen responses to each. We got one more, Arlen?
Yes, Amber says remove technology barriers for staff. Focus on the people and the relationships.
Excellent. So we'll move along here, and guys, when we have questions in the end, we'll try to have time in the end. We can go back to some of these things. Think about it. If your voice isn't being heard, your comment being heard, is that hopefully we can go back and address that, we can raise that again at the end. So thank you. So moving along. So now we've talked about building staff stamina. Let's think about student stamina, one small step at a time. I love the expression, you know, how do you move a mountain? Rock by rock, piece by piece, breaking things into small pieces. So next question, what are the small steps you believe that your teachers, therapists can take to build student stamina up? Remembering, of course, that all children, including our SPED kids, they're no longer used to 6.5-hour days of instruction. Is that even in the best of doing remote learning over the summertime, is that realistically speaking, very few schools were actually doing full school days. There was some live streaming, but more and more schools are doing that for fall. But kids are returning from an environment now in the fall where they haven't been doing 6.5 hours. So what are some ideas that you all have for building stamina up among your kids returning, whether they're returning to in-person, to a hybrid, or just returning to a much more rigorous form of remote learning? Go to the question box, please.
Yes, Dawn says, start small, don't forget to have fun. Karen says, fun, relaxing choice activities and games. William says, include frequent motor breaks throughout the day. Amber says, chunking information activities, incorporating brain breaks. Provide structured movement breaks between academic activities using sites like Go Noodle. High purposeful engagement, some PBL.
Wonderful, wonderful. And what we're doing here, I hope you can do it. I can feel the warmth of us working together here. You guys are, this is the success of our webinar together here. Hopefully there's a lot of things that I'm going to be suggesting and talking about that you're going to find helpful, but being able to hear from each of us is such an important piece. And so I'm thanking everybody for your contributing to the question boxes here, as you're already making it a wonderful experience for all of us. So thank you, and keep responding. So students building their own stamina. It's often said that the best way for a student to learn something is to teach it. So next question, how can students model, including nonverbal students, stamina to one another within the classroom? So before we were talking about what our teachers and therapists can do, what do you feel that students can do with other students to be building stamina? To the question box. That's a just tougher question.
Beth says peer buddies.
Excellent.
Work in small breakout groups. Keep trying and display a positive attitude. Back to the basics, collaboration and discussions. Encourage learning, how to correspond to each other via chats. Time to talk together and greet one another. Encourage each other. Use the chat in Zoom. My students love that.
Excellent. Very good.
Student breakout rooms, student leaders, student mentors, coaches, reteach concepts they have mastered.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Those are all fantastic. Now what I want to do now is I want to talk about conceptually about comparing cooperation and collaboration. The difference between cooperation and collaboration, particularly for students with special needs. We're really looking at a process from following to leading. Let me explain. So in cooperation, when students cooperate with a teacher or a therapist, they do as they're told on a lesson, and they can be taught to follow instruction, but they're still often within themselves. But in collaboration, when students collaborate with a teacher, a therapist, and other students, they're going so much further because they're coming out of themselves and into the world around them. Walls melt away, and instead of just following, students are leading with their own imaginations. In the question box, please, what can be some examples of collaboration within a classroom? To the question box.
Okay, Barbara says lots of praise for students who encourage each other.
Nice.
Small group projects. Let students make their own community. Talking about passions and purpose. Working on a Google SlideShare with a peer. Surveys in Google, Pear Deck, etc. to get student feedback. problem-solving activities. Reflect on a story, complete a STEM activity. Working on G-slides creation in small groups, we had that one already. Have small group interactions via breakout rooms.
Excellent, excellent. What I'd like to do is introduce a concept that I'm just loosely calling ICI for now. Integration, collaboration, and innovation within the classroom, beginning with the first I of integration. So integrating the writing of IEPs with teachers and therapists together, out of which all other integrations follow. Integration of teachers and therapists in the classroom in times of COVID and beyond of the new normal. So what we're looking at here is would have noticed in so many schools that that I've worked in before. I don't know if you've all noticed this as well. Is often there's a parallel structure that takes place when the creating of IEPs, where teachers are filling in their section of the IEPs, therapists are doing theirs, but the left hand and the right hand don't necessarily know what they're doing, and so sometimes without that sense of integration, is that the consistency which is needed to create the best possible IEP isn't taking place. And so we get that sense of integration first in the IEPs, out of that, everything else flows. The lesson plans, everything will flow out of the IEPs. So that IEPs is that first integral step. The other thing is that for many of us who are moved to in-person learning, into hybrid learning, what we're looking at is a sense of minimizing exposures to the virus, where there's less transitioning and less of pulling out of therapists, pulling kids out, and much more pushing in. And so this is an opportunity, since so many therapists are pushing into the classrooms anyways, is to set up a higher level of integration in therapists. So for example, one thing that we're doing in our school is in our lesson plan writing now, is that for every lesson plan that a teacher is doing, at least one therapist will sign off on the lesson plan, and vice versa. When therapists are creating theirs, is at least one teacher will sign off on what the therapists are doing. So there's really a sense that the left hand and the right hand are truly, instead of working in a parallel structure, that's more like a helix structure, and everybody knows what everybody else is doing because of that integration. So integration in the writing of IEPs is, I've just kind of talked about this a little bit, is that therapists are often working in parallel, writing their own, and they're not knowing what the teacher's lesson plans are, or the teacher not really understanding what the task analyses are in social work, speech, and PT or OT. But what happens is when authentically teachers and therapists are working together to create the IEP, and out of which the classroom activities, of course, will follow. So, and then we talked about integration of teachers and therapists, combining on lesson plans and therapies, signing off on each other's lesson plannings, knowing what the other one is doing, particularly valuable this year when there's less pulling out. So now moving on to the C of collaboration, collaboration between teacher and therapist, collaboration between teacher and student, collaboration between student and student. So with teacher and therapist, writing lesson plans, and now talk about designing educational games together. We're going to do a deep dive in a few minutes about creating educational games together and providing for both instruction from the teachers and delivery service from the therapist. And then between teacher and student, effective use of gamification, and with creating teacher and students creating games together. A student not just cooperating by doing a lesson, but collaborating by giving parts of the lesson back to the teacher. Students taking more responsibility for their own learning through gameplay, and teachers creating lesson plans that lead to students making their own discoveries in the classroom from gameplay. Collaboration between student and student, when playing educational games together that the students and the teachers and the therapists all create. What a classroom looks like when students are authentically, not just engaged in the lesson, but are truly and authentically engaged with one another. The kinds of knowledge that are built through student-to-student engagement, moving from a sense of interpersonal learning to interpersonal learning. Moving on to the I, the innovation, is that innovating the classroom environment, innovating classroom instruction, innovating classroom assessment, innovating the way that we turn assessment data to new classroom practice. innovating within the classroom environment, creating innovation through gameplay. We're going to concentrate here about gameplay, but other ways, of course, are using videos and creating innovation through changes in the physical environment, through the use of space, and also creating innovation through the social and emotional environment, creating a greater sense of rapport between teacher and student and student and student. Innovating with classroom instruction, adding gameplay to instruction. Other ways to do it, we're going to do that deep dive into gameplay. Other ways just to acknowledge it, so for example, is virtual reality and electronic simulations. When we're talking about adding gameplay to instruction, it can be done through card games, board games, and creating games using all 8 multiple intelligences. So we talk about gameplay to multiple intelligence learning. Is the 8 multiple intelligences, of course, are auditory learning, visual learning, kinesthetic learning, musical learning, intrapersonal learning, interpersonal learning, logical learning, and naturalistic learning. And we're going to apply all those in the gameplay. When we leave here at 4 o'clock, you're going to all be game experts. In building stamina through game design, customization and differentiation for each student is key. So the level of engagement that we're working toward to creating the classroom, in this case through game design, it truly hinges on how well your teachers can create a customization and differentiation in gameplay. So for example, in our school, I have a student who loves car rides. I have a student who loves route making. I have a student who loves weather. I have a student who loves Disney characters. And so for the question here, going back to the question box now, is what are the kinds of customizations that your students love? What are their faves? What are the favorite things that your special education students really love to do? Before we talk about game playing, we need to talk about what are the things that they love. So please go to the question box and give us some examples of the kinds of things that your kids love.
Okay, quick question from Shelly. She was wondering, Phil, what did the E stand for in your acronym?
What is the E?
Yeah, she said it was the E stand for. Was there an E or was it ICI?
No, it was just ICI. So integration, collaboration, and innovation. ICI.
Here we go. All right, here's some things. The students love Roblox, basketballs and Elmo, skateboarding, Discovery Channel, Rubik's Cube. I have one who loves football. So to help him get on track, I help him moving his football forward to get a touchdown. Go Noodle, recording music, video games, Legos, train, SpongeBob, football, car racing, motocross, animals, Fortnite, Pokemon, music, light up toys, drawing. It's endless, Phil.
This is good. Let's go. Let's keep going, because these are the kinds of things when you're hearing these guys. Keep these in mind when Arlen sends the copy of this to you. All these things that you're hearing now are going to be great. So this is really key. So Arlen, when they get this back, they won't see. Will they see the question boxes or no?
We can provide them a list of all the responses.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, good.
Yeah, it's
So that's good. So we'll move on then, since it is an endless list. But that's going to be really important, guys. Is that because what it is while you're customizing and bringing things out is that we know that together is we have hundreds of us together on this call, and the hundreds of us that are together on this call, of course, are representing thousands and thousands of students and thousands of thousands of special ed students within those thousands. And the ability to be able to have these kinds of lists at your disposal, I think you're going to find these kinds of the answers to this particular question box extremely helpful. So let's keep that in mind. So why gamification in building academic stamina? So when you think about measuring a child's engagement in gameplay, as we all know, the kids will play games for hours if we let them, right? But we also know, and painfully so, that we measure engagement in a classroom in minutes and sometimes even in seconds. So what we want to do is that, borrowing from Webb's depth of knowledge, is that the shorter times of engagement are when it's basically just sort of a memory thing, a recall, and then you build into concept and skill building, and then to strategic thinking, and then to extended thinking. All those things are greatly served through game design, and we're going to go more deeply into that in a moment. So let's think for a moment about the elements of good gameplay. Is that there's always a story, there's an object of the game, there's a control panel, there's how to play, there's scoring, and there's how to win. So in the story, what we're looking at here is creating stories in each area of core curriculum. Building upon those likes that we just heard, but now think of how you could take those things that you heard about, things that you heard about with sports, the things that you heard about, like with all the different things we heard about, is that of how you apply those to language arts, social studies, science, and math, and then inserting the students in a role-playing view into the educational game. So, question box. Now, you wrote about all the things that your kids just like. Now, take what we just heard, and this is going to be a little bit more complex, but take what we just heard and think about what your story ideas can be from core academic subjects. So in other words, let's go to the question box and talk about language arts games, social studies games, science games, and math games that we can create.
Okay, really quick from Julie, go fish. Baby Einstein lost his time travel machine and has to solve math questions to get the blueprints back. Old maid, superhero theme. Where in the world is?
Nice. Excellent. Good examples. All right, let's move along. Object of the game. What are the outcomes that you're seeking? So now in the question box, for each of the story ideas that you just had, what can be the object of your game? What can be the outcomes that you wish your students to learn? These questions are getting harder, but I know you guys are up to the task. What are some?
All right, finding ways to save money for video games.
Excellent.
Role play to solve a problem. Call and responses. To learn how to add. Writing notes. Learning math facts through 20 adding or subtracting. Pattern recognition, problem solving, question answering. Behavior management skills with money and real life problems. Hearing place names throughout country or the world. Learn letters and sounds. Building character, learning how to be kind to others. Participate and communicate, working together to reach a common goal. Type to previous learning. You do, I do, we do, turn taking.
Excellent. Thank you, Arlen. And thank you, august contributors. So the control panel. So think in terms, how are the students / players, are they going to progress in the game? Is there a spinner? Is there real dice or electronic dice? Is there a game board? Are there playing cards? What are the student movements within the classroom? Are there workstations? Is there an obstacle course? Are there mysterious landing places within the classroom? And how is movement achieved? Is it one step at a time? Or is it movement even achieved through task analysis? So, and then thinking about how to play, thinking in terms about what are the rules of play? What's the fairness, the evaluation, the assessment? It's really interesting. Is that one of the things I was often asked as a game designer? What would people would ask me? Well, how do you create a game that sells? And the answer I always had to them, the first thing to think about, if you don't create a game that's fair, you don't have a good game, because kids will go right to that. They'll sense right away, like if you're doing things with some of the questions and things you're putting in, if you award like the same amount of scoring to an easy question than you do to a hard question, that you're done, you're sunk. The kids are going to pick up on that, and they won't see the authenticity of what you're trying to create. What's also really interesting, of course, in games is that when you talk about evaluation and assessment, that happens all the time in games, but it also applies all the time in education. So there's going to be some really interesting parallels here. And then what are the timings to work on increasing stamina? Do you want your game to start as a 5-minute game? Then you want to move it to 10 and then 15 to 20 minutes. Can you get to the point where you can do a whole class period where the game is being played? And then you want to be thinking in terms of students playing individually or in teams. Scoring. Almost all successful games, scoring is in points. So how are you going to set up point systems for your games? Will it be based upon number of correct answers? Will it be based upon parts of play discovered or achieved? You know, how is the scoring made fair? Scoring something that I was just mentioning, something that's easier shouldn't be worth as many points as something that's harder. How to win? Is it by scoring the most points? Is it by completing first? And by the way, I don't recommend that you do it by who completes it first, because learning is usually not best served in a racing format. So is it by multiple teams completing with multiple winners? So in the question, going back to the question box now, what do you think are some different ways to win the games that you create? So think back here to the games that you were just thinking about of creating, or something that you heard another person contribute. What would be a way to win the game that you were thinking about creating? Or if you liked what somebody else suggested more than what you were thinking about, what would be a way to win a game that you heard mentioned from the stuff that Arlen just ran off from the previous question boxes? To the question box, please.
Yes, Garrett says accuracy and being able to explain your answer.
Nice.
Celeste says when everyone completes the game. Jocelyn says create a team or small group community and foster them to learn how to build as a team. A rubric, several winners with a time limit, within a time limit, improving your score from previous attempts, explaining how you got to your answer, group point total, answer enough questions to get through the checkpoints/markers.
Nice. Very good. Very good. Now what I'd like to do is let's take a look. We have the 8 multiple intelligences. We know that these are the way that all our children learn. So how do we incorporate the multiple intelligences into our games? So let's take each one of them. So talking with auditory games. So auditory learning, of course, was having to do with the spoken word. So how do you use the spoken word in gameplay? So for a hint, you could record multiple voices, either other teachers, therapists, other than you, or recording students if they're verbal, or by editing speech by famous people, by internet search, and by recording sounds and sound effects. So more about auditory games. Games where you learn through listening. Games where you learn through hearing stories, or by creating your own storytelling. So to the question box, what are some examples of auditory games that you can create? I feel like I want to do that Jeopardy theme. Music, da 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 da, bum bum bum, bum ba dum bum bum ba da 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 dum.
And here comes Dawn right out of the gate, animal sounds.
Excellent.
Let's see if anybody else has an answer. This one may have stumped them, Phil.
I know. These are the kinds of things that take a lot of reflection. Is that, you know, games that involve sound. So you could do animal sounds is a great one. We can leave it there. Is that, and we'll go on to the next one. But these are things, and we could, when we get to the question and answer time, we can go deeper into each of these categories as well, as well. So visual games. So the internet provides millions of visuals, and we're living in a time like no other when it comes to creating visual games, because there's literally millions of materials out there for us that are all free for us to use. And also thinking about visual games, what I'd like you to please think about is the concept here is games where you see something first of what you're expected to know, so that the answers and the kinds of things that will come out of that are generated by the visuals that you see first. And so we can think in terms of colors, shapes, patterns in games, think about matching games, comparison games, cause and effects games. So going to the question box here, what are some examples of visual games that you can create?
Name that feeling based on people's faces and body language.
Nice.
Social story games.
Very interesting.
Vocabulary and definition. Phonic
Yep.
games. Colors and familiar places.
Nice.
math fluency.
Good.
Numbers, puzzles to match numbers, colors, letters, etc. Science reactions, maps.
Nice. Nice. Very good.
Geometry.
Nice. You know, when we think about it, one of the things about math, of course, is the ability to take math, which by definition is abstract, and to make math completely visual. We think about geometry being visual, but be able to take other kinds of mathematical concepts and make them visual, which we're hearing here. You guys are really onto something special with that, because if the ability to create visual math games, that's a true ticket to success there. So nicely done, everybody. Kinesthetic games. So both the creation, now what I'd like, the concept I'd like to present here is the idea that the creation of the game itself is kinesthetic, as well as the kinesthetic game that you're actually creating. So in other words, the process of creating the game board or the deck of cards or whatever way that you're also creating the game within the classroom when the students are involved with that, that's a kinesthetic game itself. The game of actually making the game is actually a great kinesthetic exercise, as well as actually playing the game. So also thinking terms in kinesthetic games about physical activities. Think of the use of touch and materials in creating gameplay. Think of the power of building and using the idea of building things as a path to victory within the game. Think about building pictures. Think in terms about building structures. Think in terms of building cities, building worlds. So what are some examples of kinesthetic games that you can create? To the question box, please.
Okay, Marcy says, conducting a science experiment.
Nice.
Rachel says, Legos. Alyssa says, makerspace.
Nice.
Tara says, ABC yoga. Puppet creation and their setting environment to create stories. Jenga with questions on. ID items by touch. Mirror what each other do.
You know what, Arlen, I think what I need to do is that I need to start a new game company with the people on this call here, because we have some that are very, I think, far-reaching value. The kinds of things that you guys are talking about, this is really wonderful, guys. These things could be extremely transformative in all our classrooms. Great work, guys. Keep it coming. Moving on to musical games. We know music is one of the multiple intelligences. So music is a game element. Games so when we're talking about musical games, is think in terms of creating games where our students are understanding and processing sounds. Games that use rhythm, games that use patterns in sound, games that use relationships between sounds, games that use ability to process rhymes and other auditory information. Music is movement. Music is an aid to memory. Music is positive stimulation. So how can you, to the question box, please, how can you use music in the games that you create? To the question box.
Jocelyn says, name that tune.
Nice.
Tara says, singing sight words.
Interesting.
Jocelyn also says, find me a song that goes with. Clap out syllables. Music reinforcement for the right answers. Sing spelling words. Coping skills rap. A game of Simon Says using various sounds and music. Using notes as different fractions. Music signals characters and moods. Find words that rhyme. Hip hop math.
Excellent. These are all fabulous. Thank you. So interpersonal games. So of course, interpersonal learning involves students that work best and are stimulated by those around them. So in creating interpersonal games, think in terms of team play and how you'll select who plays on which team and how you'll select the ways that each team member contributes. And when we think about in terms of team play, is that we're talking about interpersonal games, we're talking about things like with board games and card games and those kinds of things. but you could also be creating games within your classroom that's actually like a sport activity. If you're doing something where you're doing like dramatic readings and plays, that's a form of a game of itself. If you wanted to be doing some debates for kids that are verbal, but you could also even, I invite you, for our kids that are nonverbal, using their assistive technology devices, you could be doing debates with those as well and putting it into a game format. Some of the things for a debate going with our nonverbal students could be so fascinating. So think in terms now of the question box. What are some kinds of interpersonal games that you can create? To the question box.
Okay, you might have stumped him here, Phil. It's going slow.
I know, it's a tough one. I know. And
here comes Garrett. Each person has a job on their team, and each person needs to complete the job to win the game. Students can peer edit the jobs of the other students did.
nice, very good. You can tell that these questions are getting more complex.
Yeah, Jocelyn says sports teams, question mark.
Yeah, so what it could be like, for example, if you wanted to create a game where you were using like a form of, like you wanted to use the concept where maybe you wanted to set up a classroom like a baseball diamond where there are 4 bases, and where the kids would go like from first base to second base to third base to home. And in each place and each time they were home, it was like scoring a run, as in a baseball game, where there were things to do, where basically first base, second base, and third base become workstations or parts of a game, like an interactive game board. That would be one example of using a sports concept of play. And there are many others. All right, I'm going to move along to intrapersonal games. So we know that we have interpersonal learners, those that are stimulated by working with their peers within a classroom. We know, and particularly within one of the challenges, we know that all within a gen ed environment, we also have our interpersonal learners who do better working by themselves. And sometimes we want to encourage that. Sometimes we want to build from interpersonal learning to interpersonal learning. But there is a power that comes from students doing things completely on their own, of course. So in interpersonal games will be the ability of a student to follow through on their own, the ability of a student to manage their own thoughts and ideas, the ability to succeed in a game on their own, a game played with themselves rather than against others. So what are some examples of interpersonal games that you can create and that your students can create? So one-on-one games, we're looking at it's single play. We're looking at single player games at the moment in this particular part of our time together.
Here we go. Glenn says, choose your own adventure. Jeopardy from William. Matching from Don Andell.
Nice. Very good. Good.
Beat the clock. See how quickly you can. Scavenger hunt. Quick draw McGraw. Finger matching.
Nice. Very, very good. And what we're seeing here is that what is the power that comes out of interpersonal games? What is the power that comes out of intrapersonal games? Really fascinating concepts that take more than an hour to go over, but really fascinating stuff. So logical learning games. So in logical learning is gameplay to create ability to reason, gameplay to solve problems, gameplay to use numbers, gameplay to use abstract visual information, gameplay to analyze cause and effect relationships. So what are some of the kinds of logical games that you and your students can create? Did we stump them, Arlen? I can't believe we stumped this group. I'm sure there's a couple.
No, here they come. Here they come now. Alyssa says, class shop. Students earn money. Making maps. Real life situation role play games. These show the students how the skills will be used in the future. Oregon Trail, I remember that game.
Yep.
Escape rooms, virtual escape rooms.
Nice. Excellent.
Learning how to
Excellent.
count money.
Very good. So naturalistic, and then the final, the eighth multiple intelligence is looking at naturalistic learning games. Games could be games based on outdoors, gameplay about working in nature, gameplay about living things like plants and animals, gameplay on other biology related subjects, gameplay about natural events, gameplay about weather, gameplay about geologies. Back to the question box, what are some naturalistic learning games that you can create?
Okay, here they come now. Nature walk, scavenger hunt.
Nice.
How many had consistent weather? Living versus non-living sorts. What do you wear during this season? Two more for scavenger hunts. Building shadow boxes. Guessing the weather pattern, getting points for right guesses. Name how many stray cats you saw. That's an interesting one. Board games to help you create your garden design. Collecting leaves.
Wow. Excellent. Very, very good. Very, very good, guys. So one of the things now, particularly what I want to invite us to do, we've looked at games for the 8 multiple intelligences. Is now what I'd like to invite you to do is that when we're thinking in terms of our special needs children, is to looking at conceptually about applying functional skills to gameplay. So looking at communication, how we make wants and needs known, including saying no in your game's characters and in the gameplay. Choice making in gameplay, choosing a preferred item or activity to score more points within the framework of play. Safety, when we think in terms of creating least restrictive environment for our special needs kids, is we can create safety kinds of games. So creating scenarios like, responding to different kinds of accidents, or responding what to do in the case of fire, or what to do in encountering strangers. The power of self-care in games. So we can build games around toileting, bathing, and other health and hygiene issues. We could look about building leisure and recreation into gameplay. And we could also look at building vocational skills and work skills into gameplay. Also, I'd like you guys and us all to be thinking about task analyses within gameplay. So using the learner's present level of performance on their IEPs and also their IFSP goals, teachers and therapists can identify prerequisite skills that are necessary for the learner to have in order to perform the target skill. So basing gameplay that's based upon both prerequisite and target skills, and collect baseline data on performance of the target skill. And this can directly transfer to scoring within gameplay. So in other words, is you look at your baseline data and how you can use your baseline data that you collected like within a task analysis and apply that actually within a sense of gameplay. So we talk about building stamina by incrementally adding steps. How do you move a mountain? Rock by rock, piece by piece, small steps. Make the games you create gradually longer in timing and complexity, and adding new scoring options. Some things to keep in mind when creating gameplay: the learner's temperament, the learner's learning style, the history of what has and hasn't worked for the particular learner, the learner's IEP and IFSP, and the environments within which the learner best functions. The sense of concluding, adding academic stamina, particularly for students in special education, requiring measuring where your kids are, determining where you're going in the weeks and months ahead. So building stamina slowly but consistently. Bring teachers and therapists together for achieving academic stamina. We've talked about ICI, integration, collaboration, and innovation. We've talked about building stamina through the games you create and customize for each of your students. So at this point, we have about 12 minutes left. We have some time for questions now during the remaining 10 minutes or so till 4 o'clock. But also, I just want to encourage everybody to please reach out to me. Here's my email. is psiegel@littlecity.org. You could also, my cell phone is 224-639-2258. Is that looking for ways to contribute? We can certainly look back to working with Arlen to give us the forum again to do more webinars on this. But if you have just some specific questions that you want to ask me, please reach out to me. If we don't answer the questions now, or you're thinking about questions later, that we can do that. So Arlen, if we can open it up for the remaining 10 minutes of our time together for questions. They've done so well in the questions.
Yes. We've got plenty of questions to go through here, Phil. So I appreciate everybody hanging on with us and making it to the end of the webinar. And now's your opportunity to ask Phil anything you want. We'll put him on the spot. Here's our first question. How do you do interactive games online on remote? That is my difficulty. I play lots of games in person, but trying to put it online for them and see me and play with me, I'm having a hard time finding these.
Okay, so I got a couple suggestions here, and a couple ways to do that. Is that we know that there's some basic kinds of online things that you can do, like with Quizlets and things of that nature. Is like if you Google just some online kinds of online platforms that exist for doing it, you're going to find things that are there. But what I'd like to really encourage you to do when it comes to doing online learning, and who is this from again, Arlen? I wanted to address them directly.
It was Julie. I can't remember her last name, but it was Julie.
But Julie, so Julie, one of the things that I'd like you to be thinking about here is that when you're creating online games, is to actually create some snippets where you're recording yourself, with different kinds of questions and kinds of things that you want to do, and actually create, or like what we're doing here, we've actually created almost like a sense of gameplay in the way that we've done the question boxes. And look at all the amazing kinds of things that we've done here. Is what I would recommend that you do is you could create your own PowerPoint, and you could create your own sense of presenting areas of gameplay for online, where there's snippets that you're creating yourself, and then inviting your class to actually participate in real time based upon things that you've actually created ahead of time. So if that makes sense, and please follow up with me later. I can add more to that. Next question.
Phil, this comes from, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Sioban. What are the best ways to keep or display the student scores? Is there a scoreboard app?
So what it would do is that one way to do this is to actually, and this is a great way to actually use spreadsheets, is that when kids are doing their scores, actually like create a leaderboard and kind of a thing but do it so you could be their scores could be doing that there. But what I would do is that with a sense of a leaderboard is to arrange it so that rather than doing things where you're doing an up-down kind of a leaderboard.
Extra pizza? We have a lot in the OT room.
Sorry, let me turn off my. I'm in my school, and we have another meeting going on in school. Is that what I would encourage you to do in creating a leaderboard is, rather than doing up and down where kids are competing there, is to do it is at a horizontal leaderboard, where what it is that where it's basically scrolling, is what you do a situation where the scores are actually scrolling, so people aren't comparing, this person's on top and this person is on the bottom, but where each person will remember their own score. Is that when you're doing it in a scrolling format, is that it doesn't put an onus on people who have scored less than other people have, but it becomes then of a kind of an experience where then by having it there and scrolling, is the students are really competing against themselves to create a higher score within themselves. And I would really emphasize that, is that it's a sense of how people and teams are actually trying to you're playing the game more than once, is that because we know, particularly within kids within a lot of our classrooms, is that the kids will gain from familiarity with the games that you're playing, and they'll look to play it over and over again. And so it really becomes a question of not so much how kids are competing vis-a-vis other teams, but how they're doing individually and how their own team is increasing an overall team score from one time of playing to the next.
Wonderful. Here's a question from Julie. Any ideas on how to get a nonverbal student to work with me on the computer? The student won't even look at the computer, but loves his iPad.
Right. So the way they would do it is it would really begin to looking at a sense of preferred items first. Is that in order to build a sense of academic stamina that we're looking for and the higher levels of engagement, is before actually showing them a game on the iPad that you've helped to create. If you're creating the game on the iPad, is to find something first of where their level of engagement is. And so this is an opportunity where, for a limited amount of time, is if you know that your kid loves music, for example, is allow them the time to share with you a piece of music that they love that they have on their iPad, and then encourage them to use what they're sharing, what they love, into creating a game. So what you do is you might show them, and they may play, if it's a song that they love, for example, on their iPad, allow them to have that song, and then say, okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to build upon that song, and we're going to create a game based upon that environment. So if there was a music video that was attached to it, and the music video takes place on water, or it takes place with cars, is that then to create based upon that a game that shows that's based upon moving on water, or it's a game based upon route making for things. But to begin, always meeting the kids really where they are, of course. And so what we need to do is they'll be excited by the ability to be able to, that you're willing to build a game based upon their preferred video of things that they have, or their preferred activity on their iPad. So for example, if they like basketball highlights and they want to do that, is you're going to build a basketball game with them, but in order to get them engaged in the beginning, where they're not even turning it on, and you know that kid likes basketball, start with some ESPN highlights from a basketball game, from the playoffs, for example, that are going on now, and you build there. It's so important in order to do this is to get them started. For that kid who turns off the iPad right away, they won't turn the iPad off right away if it's a preferred activity that they have. So start there.
Excellent. All right, we've got time for one more question here. Phil Jocelyn asks, do you have any advice for paras that can be of service?
Yeah, so what it is that it's a great way, is one of the things that parents are going to be able to share, excuse me, is that when you talk to parents, parents are going to have a sense, as parents or as educators talking to parents, the things that'll come out, the invaluable things that happen at home. What are the kinds of things that the kids love at home? Do they love taking car rides? Do they love singing a particular song? Do they love a particular kind of interaction that they have with another member of the family? And to build upon that. So take the strengths that come out of the family unit and build upon that. And this is a great way of creating that sense of that wonderful triad that exists between the home environment, the school environment, and the student, is that using the family environment as a source of gameplay.
And I'm sorry about that, Phil. It was paraprofessionals. Do you have any advice for them?
Oh, I'm sorry. With paraprofessionals, I'm sorry. I thought you were saying parents. I'm so sorry. Yes, for the paraprofessional is that what we want to do is that I think it's important to be empowering the paraprofessional to be working, to be creating games. The games don't need to be coming just from the teacher and the therapist. As the paraprofessional in concert with the therapist, and in the sense of ICI, of the way that of integration, in order to create the sense of innovation that follows, is that this sense of, and collaboration is empowering paraprofessionals, is to work with those kids. Paras spend more time with kids than anybody. Is working, developing that relationship as a para that you have, is to say to those kids, what are those things that you really love, is to do it, and then the para and the student actually be teammates together in creating the game.
Wonderful. Well, Phil, we want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise. You really engaged the audience, and everybody got a chance to share and give you feedback, which is wonderful. It's almost 4 o'clock, so we want to wrap up here. Just a reminder that you will be receiving an email from me tomorrow with a link to this recording, a link to Phil's PowerPoint presentation, and is there anything else, Phil, that they need? Oh, a link to an evaluation that if you complete, will give you the ISB evidence of completion form if you're an Illinois educator. Does that about sum it up, Phil?
Perfect.
All right, well, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for logging in, everybody. I'm going to draw the recording to a close.
Thanks so much.